Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Patrick Chiles, who is a science fiction author. And for readers unfamiliar with your work, Patrick, could you please describe what it is that you write?
Um, yeah, I write near future hard science fiction with a little bit of a techno thriller twist, and um, that's always been what's kind of lit me up. When I was in the military and in college back in the '80s, early '90s, I was a real sucker for Cold War techno thrillers, and uh, and that's made its way into my work. I when I started writing, I approached it from the angle of if Tom Clancy wrote science fiction, what might that look like? And some of his stuff strayed a little bit into sci-fi territory. I understand that he was actually a big sci-fi fan. He actually and when he made his money, he was supporting some real early private or commercial space efforts. But I guess he never really got around to writing sci-fi, so I figured I'd do it.
Sounds great. Sounds great. So, what can readers expect from your latest book?
So my latest book, Escape Orbit, is a sequel to my first book with Bain called Frozen Orbit, and readers can expect more of the same. A continuation of the story picks up where Frozen Orbit left off. So I did leave things hanging a little bit, and hadn't intended on it being a series, but I wanted to leave it open ended enough that we could bring a series out of it. And so it is more near future science fiction, although it does get a little bit out there. Um, and the books I've written for Bain, they kind of follow two tracks. Frozen Orbit and Escape Orbit is kind of the big idea science fiction track. My other book with them called Frontier, which came out about a year and a half ago, is more of a military action adventure sci-fi track, and it is much more in the techno thriller genre. It's all set in space, and all these books happen in the same universe. So there's a little bit of character crossover, but they do follow two distinctly separate um, um, story arcs.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
yeah, so Escape Orbit, like I said, picks up where Frozen Orbit left off. We have an astronaut named Jack Templeton, who, in essence, commandeered his old crew spacecraft, and a lot of things that happened at the end of Frozen Orbit. It was a necessary thing, and somebody had to draw the short straw, and he volunteered to. But now he's slingshot out to the far edge of the solar system, and he's doing it with a little bit of purpose. He is looking for the theoretical planet Nine, which is way out beyond like the Kuiper Belt, which is where Pluto and orbits and a lot of our comets come from. I don't know if you're familiar with that theory or not. So I'm happy to explain it if
Hmm.
you want to. Okay,
Yeah.
so the theory Planet Nine, and it's called Planet Nine because these same astronomers are the ones that basically killed Pluto as a planet. They realized that there were a number of large objects, they call dwarf planets like Pluto, large asteroids, that kind of thing, way out there in the Kuiper Belt, at the far edge of the solar system. And their orbits were all being perturbed, meaning they were being bent in a certain direction. And so that, it's kind of pointing like signs on a roadway. There's something out there that's pulling in there. And so, doing what astronomers do, they did a lot of math, and they figured out that over time, meaning in billions of years, that something with the mass of at least the size of Neptune had to be lurking out there, drawing those objects, its gravity drawing those objects and distorting their orbits out in that direction. And they were able to finesse it enough to get a pretty good idea of this undiscovered planet's orbital period and where it might be right now. They haven't been able to find it. It will be really tough to image something that far out. Um, it's led to a lot of alternate theories of what else might have a lot of gravity out there that we can't see, like black holes and that kind of thing. So I thought that was a pretty good genesis for a story that he gets to where he's going and finds find something, but it's not a planet. And so it leads to, it's also not a black hole. But it leads to a lot of other stuff, a lot of unexpected discoveries. And of course, he's at the end of his supply chain basically, and almost out of propellant, not enough to get back to Earth in any time that he can survive. So his former crewmates back on Earth are scrambling to, now that they've found him after he had disappeared for 5 years, they're scrambling to put a mission together to go out there and get him. And so there's a lot of political intrigue that goes along with that. I think that's where some of my techno thriller influence comes in. Um, Factions within the government that don't want to see human exploration anymore. Factions with other governments that don't want to see the U.S. doing exploration anymore. So there's a lot of pushing and pulling and maneuvering to keep them from getting where they want to go.
Okay. So what do you think draws readers to these kinds of books?
Well, I tell you what, I am still working hard to draw readers. and, um, so hard sci-fi, I think, especially near future stuff, is starting to gain popularity. I mean, the Martian is an obvious example.
Mm,
Um, I think another good example is Sandra Bullock's movie Gravity that came out
yeah.
several years ago. Now, you know, you can pick it at some of the science behind it. You know, like all the space stations aren't in a convenient little, you know, trail of orbits that you can jump around between. But um, I think as space flight becomes more routine, the kind of things that I write hopefully are going to be less science fiction and just fiction, you know, straight up thrillers. That happens to be the setting. And going back to mention The Martian is a really good example. You know, Andy Weir really, um, he really hit on something with that. He really struck a nerve. And a lot of people love that story. And of course, a lot of people went to see the movie. Um, and I was self-publishing my first books around the same time that his first one came out. You know, and we were kind of going, you know, in the same direction. His are way more technically detailed than mine. I like to build in just enough to keep it real, and I've got to be sure I understand the underlying technology enough to where that realism comes across. But I don't want it to become the story. I don't want it to be jumping from one problem solving event to another. Um, but ultimately, I think what draws people to it is that it feels like something they could be experiencing right now. And that's what I'm really going for. You know, when you get into a lot of traditional space opera type sci-fi, um, it's more about escapism, and I think all good writing is about escapism, transporting you in a different story. But again, these I like to keep more grounded in the real world. I really want people to be able to picture themselves in that environment. So,
Mhm. Okay. So what was the inspiration for let's say Frozen Orbit? Because
mhm.
it's the same universe as your latest book.
So the inspiration for that's a great question. Because how that came about is a really good story. So I had already self-published my first two novels. They were called Perigee and Farside, and they're kind of an extrapolation of where commercial spaceflight could be in a few years. And I used my previous experience in airlines and business aviation and the military to build on that. But I kind of use that as a model and look at, okay, if that stuff becomes routine, it's going to look a lot like the world I already know. You know, the specifics are going to be different, but the personality types, the way things are run, the way crises are dealt with, I think it's, you know, I had a really good basis to work off of. But I've always been fascinated with astronomy and space exploration. And this was about 2015 when the New Horizons probe was about to arrive at Pluto. And I was really excited for that because that was going to be our first look at Pluto. You know, all the images we had before are really fuzzy. Even from Hubble, the best they could do is, you know, it looked like, you know, something from a 16-bit pixelated video game. And I thought this is going to be really neat, and to be that far out and to finally get a look at this place, what might we find? And what if we found something we didn't expect that was obviously not natural? And so that idea was rolling around in my head for a really, really long time. And because the kind of stuff I was writing, that, it wasn't about space aliens and starships, it couldn't just be as obvious as an alien spacecraft, right? It needed to be something uh, more close to home. So I settled on a Russian spacecraft from the 1980s. And how the heck would they have gotten out there? Especially, I should emphasize, a crewed Russian spacecraft is discovered derelict in orbit at Pluto. Well, back in the 60s, the Air Force, our Air Force, um, pretty seriously studied a method of propulsion. They call it the Orion Project. And basically, what it is you build a big enough spacecraft with a big, what amounts to a pusher plate at the base of it, and you just start ejecting nuclear bombs out of the back end and blowing them up. And it's constant. So it's a lot of power, a lot of thrust, and constant acceleration. And they figured you could get a good sized spacecraft. I'm talking something the size of Skylab with a giant pusher plate and a big propellant magazines. Um, you could get it to something like 5 or 6% of light speed, and which pretty extreme. But I thought, that's it. That's how they did it, because who else but the old Soviet Union would have been crazy enough to build something like that and be able to keep it secret? So then the story became, well, why didn't it come back, and why were they still keeping it a secret? And anyway, the discovery of this is what prompts NASA to build a similar spacecraft, a little bit more elegant propulsion than just blowing up bombs, but works on the same principle. And they go out there to find it. And that's kind of where the whole story came from. It all came together for me. I was driving home from work at my old job, and I'd been mulling this stuff over, and all of a sudden it hit me what they were going to find, how the story was going to end. So I had the beginning of the story and the end of the story really solid in my head. So I wrote the opening and closing chapters first. Then I had to figure out everything else that happened in between. So, but again, Escape Orbit picks up where Frozen Orbit left off.
So, what kind of research did you have to do in order to write um, Escape Orbit? Orbit.
Both of them required a lot of research. In all of my books do, as I mentioned, I want to make sure I understand the underlying technology enough to write about it convincingly. And that's not just knowing how things work, but how things might break, right? Because you
Mhm.
got to have conflict. You got to have, story beats that the characters have to get past, to get, to do what they need to do, and it needs to be a fundamental part of the story without taking it over. So, Frozen Orbit, I did a lot of research again in that Orion project. A lot of research on Pluto, Kuiper Belt. Um, it gets into some origins of life stuff, so there were some things I had to learn about really fundamental biology and how DNA and RNA strands are woven, and it made my head hurt. So I had the technological foundation pretty well settled for Escape Orbit. That didn't require a lot, but Escape Orbit required a lot of research into some really bizarre physics. Not to give too much away, but I needed to learn a lot about wormholes and um, and how time dilation works, because there's that element in it. And boy, trying to keep all that stuff straight, you know, from a couple of different characters' points of view on opposite ends of or excuse me, different localized references of time, or proper time. I need to speak of it correctly. um, that can really get you wound up in knots. So that was the real focus of research for this. I needed to understand those physics enough to again to write about it convincingly and have it move the story along.
Mhm. So, what was your favorite research story? And it doesn't have to be for those two books, for any of the books you've written.
I tell you, um, probably the wormhole research. That was really challenging. I got a lot of help with that. I reached out to one of our other Bain authors, Les Johnson, who
Yeah.
you probably know, a research scientist with NASA, and he pointed me to a professor at Baylor who has been studying this phenomena, and that Dr. Gerald Cleaver, he was really really helpful. Sent me a paper that he and some of his students had published on it. Answered a lot of questions, kept me out of trouble for the most part. Hopefully I did right by him in the book. So yeah, that was some stuff that I really had to work hard to get my head around before I could write about it.
Hmm. Okay. So, what was the biggest challenge that you had in writing and putting out Escape Orbit?
The biggest challenge was, I mentioned the time dilation stuff, but there were a lot of challenges in just keeping the story straight. For some reason, with this book, I went down a lot of rabbit trails, probably 20 or 30,000 words worth. So around probably 80 to 100 pages worth of content didn't make it into the book. So, however, once I took them all out, the book was put to bed. I was looking through them because Bain had asked me for a short story for the website to lead up to the release for this. And I thought, oh, this will be easy. I've got all this content I wrote. I can pull something out of there and work it up into a good short story. No, it's the chapters for the next book. and, I've got about 6 or 7 chapters. Everything I pulled out of that, once I strung it together, I realized this is a really coherent story on its own, and it'll make a great third book in the series and wrap this up as a trilogy. So I'll be getting to work on that at some point in the near future. I've got another one I'm in contract with Bain right now, but I saw Tony at the Fantasy convention over the weekend and told her, yeah, I'll during the road show in front of everybody. So yeah, I'll be pitching this to you in a couple of months. But I was really happy with how they turned out. They just didn't fit in Escape Orbit, but they're going to go great in the next one.
Oh, interesting. So, what else can we expect from you in the near future? And apparently, it's a third book.
Yeah, this one won't be my next one. The one I'm working on right now, I pitched to Tony, gosh, almost a couple of years ago now. She really loved the idea. Um, and once I had it fleshed out, I told her, yeah, I think I'm ready to write it because it's really stuck in my head right now. And we discussed the whole story arc and the character arc. And she said, no, this is really 2 books. So that's always good to hear. I'm working on the first in that series right now.
Mhm.
I have a working title that's pretty clunky, so I'm not going to say it. I'm looking for something much punchier. Uh, but this one is going to be a real departure for me. This is not going to be hard sci-fi. This is going to be more like far-flung, fun sci-fi with aliens and stuff like that, and involves a human woman, a paramedic, who gets drawn up into this world that she didn't expect. So the best way I can describe it is think Men in Black, but with medics
Yeah.
and the stuff they have to deal with. And she's going to eventually arrive at the point where she's had enough, she's seen enough, she's ready to come home, but each run she goes on takes her farther away from home, and it makes it harder for her to get back, not just distance but back to the time thing. So there will be a little hard sci-fi. There's going to be a little bit of time dilation and all that. You can't get around relativity even with an advanced alien civilization. So that'll be some element of it too. But yeah, I'm working on the first one in that series right now. I think we'll see what the publisher wants after that, whether they want the next one in the eccentric orbit series or if they want me to move right ahead with the next one with this medic. So I got a lot of
Okay.
stuff in the hopper.
Oh, great. Okay. So I have questions for you about being a writer. What's your favorite part about being a writer on the whole writing and publishing process?
Typing the end.
You're
It's,
not the first one that said that.
dang gummit. Thought I was more original than that. Seriously, getting the finished product, um, seeing the proofs come back, all typeset and how it's going to appear in print, and getting the cover. I mean, these covers, come on, these are great. It's a real blessing to have somebody like Bob Eggleton want to take on my books to do covers for him. He even goes as far as to ask for my input on them. Shows me the rough sketches, as he's working them up. I mean, the one for Scape Orbit just blew me away. Even the sketch for it, and I said, man, you could probably just go with that. But he's just that good. That's really when it gets exciting. You get that, you get the illustration, and then they do all the cover font and everything, and you realize, yeah, this is real. This is going to happen, and I've got to make doggone sure this book lives up to that cover.
Hmm. Okay. So what do you consider the most challenging part of the whole writing process?
Probably the middle. I mentioned with Frozen Orbit, I had the beginning chapters and the end chapters solid. I knew exactly where it needed to start and where it needed to end, but figuring out how they were going to get from A to Z was a real challenge. Escape Orbit was kind of the same thing. That's why I ended up with 7 or 8 chapters worth of content that didn't didn't make it into the book, and that's where things start to slow down. I think a lot of writers have said the same thing. There are some who are able to outline everything, not just chapter by chapter, but scene by scene. I wish I could. My head just doesn't work that way. You know, some things are real. They come to me really clearly, and they're really obvious, and other things don't. So sometimes you have to work harder at it than others. And I'll have a really good idea of who I want the characters to be. They'll develop themselves as I'm moving along. And as far as where the story needs to go, I'll have a very good idea of how it's going to begin, how it needs to end, some of the major story beats in between, certain things that need to happen, but everything else is kind of wide open. So I'm a little bit split between being a plotter, being a pantser. So the one I'm working on right now is, as I mentioned, it's going to be a departure for me. It's also written in first person, which is new for me. The short stories I've done for Baen have all been first person. This will be the first time I've done a novel in first person, and in some ways, it's easier that way. I'm completely in this one character's head. I don't need to think about. I mean, I have to think about the other characters, but not to the point where I'm describing as a narrator what they're doing or what they might be thinking. It's all from the main character's POV. Um, but that's a little more of a discovery writing process I'm finding. But it's great because it just flows along. Once I've figured out what's happening and how she's reacting or what she's doing, it just blows right out of me. It's awesome.
Hmm. Okay. So what has been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
My favorite adventure has also been the most difficult, and that is quitting my day job uh, 4 years ago, and a company I'd been with for over 20 years. And in the aviation business, that doesn't happen very often. There's a lot of jumping around, and it was kind of frightening. But um, my wife and I were both really committed to this. She's just been fantastic, and I literally could not have done it without her. Um, you know, um, I couldn't afford to stop work entirely, so I still work on retainer for a safety consulting firm. Um, but that makes for actually a pretty good balance because I'm able to split my days pretty evenly between that and writing. So, and in the morning is when all the ideas are coming, and that's when I get my best writing done anyway. So, about lunchtime, I'm kind of ready to shut that off and go focus on other things. But yeah, it's been an adventure. My wife stepped up as and went back to work full time to fill in the gaps so I could do this. She's committed to letting me do this. And because before, when I was working full time, it was taking me about 3 years to finish a single book. And I knew that if I was ever going to have any real success at this and possibly actually make a living off of it, then I needed to pick up the pace quite a bit. And so this has allowed me to do that. It's been quite an adjustment.
I would imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm quite happy with the way things have worked out right now. But the first couple of years of getting to this point, I won't lie, they were really really difficult. Probably the most difficult experience of my life. But I'm really glad that I did it. I'm really glad I have my wife supporting me with it.
Yeah. You're not the first person also that had said that a spouse is extremely important in this if you want to be
Oh,
a writer.
oh, absolutely. It's a bit of a cliche, but behind every man is, a strong woman. Well, it goes both ways, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
But I'm a guy, so I'm going to say it from the guy's perspective.
Of course.
But no,
So what, yeah.
it really has been
So what is the greatest lesson that you've learned thus far in your writing career?
persistence.
Okay.
It persistence and patience, especially the patience part. One of the things that, and this kind of goes back to your previous question. One of the things that made this experience as difficult as it was in the beginning was we did all this, made this major life change right before COVID started. And I mean, talk about a bad time to be a brand new published writer. So I was fortunate in that Frozen Orbit, I thought was originally going to come out in March of 2020, which would have just been horrible. It came out that January. And, so at the very least, my books were on the shelves in stores across the country and had been up, for sale on Amazon and other outlets for a couple of months before everything shut down. So it didn't exactly build a lot of momentum, but I at least got out of the starting gate. There were a lot of writers whose books never left the warehouses, um, starting in March. And um, that whole experience made it difficult, and I had no idea what to do about promoting my work, right? Because book signings weren't happening, the convention scene wasn't happening, and so it's only been in the last year that I really feel like, okay, now I'm getting started. I'm part of this world. I did my very first convention at LibertyCon last summer, and that was great. I met a lot of other writers, and found some new readers, and that's led to a lot since then. That's led to signing events with some of these other writers and helping get my foot in the door, and get used to the convention scene. And yeah, it's just nice to be out in the world again and be able to meet people face to face. I think that's probably one of the biggest components. Discoverability is difficult for all writers, but especially when you're confined to online shopping, right? Because there's nothing like going into a bookstore and just browsing and seeing a cover that looks interesting. You pick it up, you read the back cover, and then maybe you flip through a few pages and think, yeah, this looks good. I'm going to take it home with me. It's um, Amazon's great if you already have a good idea what you're looking for, but a lot of people have predicted, the end of print publishing, the ebooks are going to take over. I really feel like maybe there's a limit, an asymptotic limit, to make it sound like I know what I'm talking about with math. But I do feel like there's a limit, and maybe people are also starting to see the value in print more, kind of like the way people rediscovered vinyl records.
Hmm. Yeah. I personally, I can't stand reading online. I have to have a book in my hand. You know, I just I just do. You know?
Yeah, yeah. It for me, like I love my Kindle. I carry that thing everywhere. When I have to travel, for my day job, it's great to just be able to throw that thing in a bag, um, and and have my whole library on it. And I really like it for library lending. It's nice to be able to just go online and boom, there it is. And it's really nice for really really big books. You know,
Mhm. Yeah.
Lord of the Rings, that kind of thing. It's a
Yeah.
lot more comfortable to have that little lightweight Kindle on my lap at night than a big 1,000-page brick. But I still have the 1,000-page brick up here on my bookshelf because there's no substitute for that, and the fold-out maps and the illustrations and everything.
Hmm. That's
So
true.
yeah, so yeah, for me it depends on the book. The ones that I really love the most, I make sure I get a hard copy of those. Um, and the ones I want to read seriously, because I think we do retain what we read better if it's in a traditional print book than if we're reading on a screen,
Mm,
especially a
I think
computer.
so.
Yeah.
I think so. So what piece of advice would you want to give would you want to share to other writers?
Well, before I mentioned persistence,
Yeah.
that's an absolute necessity. Don't wait for the muse to strike because she's not coming around. You're in the friend zone with the muse. She'll show up occasionally, and it's fantastic when that happens. There's nothing like when the ideas just are flowing out of your head and you're just typing, trying to keep up. When you're describing the movie that's playing out inside your head, that's the best, but it doesn't happen often enough. You have to sit down and develop the habit. Set a goal for yourself every day. you know
Mhm.
i I try to hit 2,000 words a day. I don't always. I have an absolute minimum. I won't step away until I've gotten at least 500. And for that low of a word count, I better have an awful lot of other things going on that day to justify it.
Mhm.
And you got to have some self confidence to be able to do this too. To put in the time and all the work to put a good story together and then put it out there for other people to read. Getting discovered is still difficult. So, persistence is key. You've got to believe in yourself, and you've got to want to do it bad enough to deal with all of the bumps in the road that are going to happen along the way.
Or have there been any groups, clubs, or organizations that you'd recommend to other writers that might have helped you in your career?
Well, this one is recent. The Writer Dojo podcast and Facebook group has been fantastic. I have learned so much from those guys. I've been able to contribute some of what I know um, to the Facebook group. And, every week on the podcast, I maybe learned something I thought I understood, but now I understand a lot better. And no, it's been invaluable. It really has.
What's it called? The Writers Dojo?
The Writer Dojo, like
Oh.
karate dojo.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's Larry Correa and Steve Diamond.
Oh,
And yeah, there's a lot of good information and anecdotes on the nuts and bolts of writing life, the business of writing, the process. No, it's been terrific.
great. Okay, now I have questions about you as a person. What is one thing that most people don't realize about you?
Um, maybe you know what? I realized this at the Fantasy convention last weekend. Um, and not to toot my own horn, but I guess that's kind of what I'm here for.
Yeah.
um, that a lot of people didn't realize that I'm not that I don't have a formal technical education. I'm not an engineer or a scientist. I majored in English. and, and I've said, you don't have to be an English major to be a novelist, but you've got to be an engineer or have an engineering degree to be an engineer. There's no getting around that. Um, that made me feel really good because one of the people that expressed that surprise was an actual engineer, and
Hmm.
said, "Yeah, I couldn't tell." He said, "You got everything right." So yeah, he was really surprised to hear that. So I was again very glad to hear it because that means that all the research has paid off.
Interesting. Yeah, because science fiction is it's very technical,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of times you really do have to have the technical background. So
Well, it
it's
does it. It makes it easier for me if you got a technical or scientific background and a desire to write, and I don't want to say talent for it. There needs to be some talent. I think everybody needs practice. There's, you've got to just keep getting at it and get better at it and read a lot. So you know what you like. You know what when you're ready to start writing yourself, you have read enough other people's stuff that you have an innate sense of what works and what doesn't. And
mm,
um, but if you're writing hard sci-fi and you already have a technical background, then you've got a real advantage because back to what I was talking about of with research, not just understanding the technology, but understanding the ways it could go wrong, and understand how you can use that to create dramatic tension in your work. That's a huge advantage that they have that I don't. So that's why it takes me longer to write. It's I'm hitting the pace I intended to, but if I really knew this stuff um, at that level, I think I could come up with things a lot faster. I wouldn't have to spend so much time doing research.
hmm. Okay. So what question do you wish interviewers would ask you, and what would your answer be? This
Um,
is a hard one, I know.
that is a hard one. When did you realize you were going to be the next Robert A. Heinlein?
Aha. So when did you wish?
Oh yeah, no, no. That's my. I think that's my way of deflecting. Um,
If you don't know, that's okay.
yeah, yeah. I'm going to ask if I can
You
call
can
for a
skip that
lifeline
one.
and come back to that one.
Okay, you can skip that one. Okay. So what is or are your passions when you're not writing? And how do you make time for the things that you love?
That has been a bigger challenge than I thought it would be with being close to full time. So as I mentioned, I split my days pretty evenly between writing and my consulting job. But with my wife working full time outside the home now, I'm chief cook and bottle washer. So I'm the one that keeps up with the housework and the grocery shopping and I do most of the cooking. And that takes time. And I find at the end of the day, when all that's done and it's like, oh, I'm more tired than I thought I would be. So um, it's funny, I don't do as much in the evenings as I did before when I was working full time. But it's not taking me 3 or 4 years to finish a book either. The things I am passionate about, um, back to the space flight thing. I'm really active in what's called amateur and high power rocketry, which is kind of like these little Estes model rockets that people might have built when they were kids, and they're all grown up now. And I don't know if you can see the one that's in the corner here, but it's
Mhm.
considerably larger. And I've got probably half a dozen more of that size or bigger out in the garage. And it's I really enjoyed it. It's a real challenge, and it's not as simple as shoving a motor in and an igniter and pushing the button and watching it go. Have to fly with a an organized group, and we have to get FAA waivers and stuff like that. And so it's a really obscure kind of nerd hobby, but it's a lot of fun. Um, I also play guitar. That's not something I've been as involved in as I used to be. It kind of ebbs and flows. So there's been times where I was really into it and I was practicing, an hour or two every day, and you know, jamming with a couple of local bands and that kind of thing. Haven't done as much of that lately. So, um, so a lot of what I do is just spending time at home with my wife in the evening, and when the weather's nice, which here in Ohio isn't often enough, I like to get out and go hiking, and that's probably the things I'm most passionate about outside of writing right now.
Okay. So what does your writing space look like?
Well, this is it. Um, this is a sunroom off of our main home. It's like a ranch style condo kind of deal, and this has been great. This is like dedicated writing space. Get a lot of natural sunlight in here. Um, I can close it off if I need to, if I need to work at night. And that happens a lot when I'm getting towards the end of a book. There's always this big crush, and I think a lot of writers are the same way. No matter how well you outlined or plotted things out and how much you try to organize your time, those last couple of weeks where everything's coming together and the entire story is in your head all, and you've got to get it all out at one time. It'll be 16, 17-hour days. It'll be up till, 2 or 3 in the morning, just blasting out words. But yeah, it's bookshelves are in here, models I've built are in here. A lot of plants. Started getting into bonsai trees. That's the other hobby I started pursuing. So I'm trying not to kill the one that my wife gave me for Christmas right now.
Okay. When you're writing, do you have any foods or drinks that you need to have that you need to have
Coffee.
coffee coffee?
Coffee. Not much food. Drinks, it's coffee. Like there's the stereotype of, the author at his typewriter with a bottle of bourbon or something. Now that's over off of the dining area, but no alcohol when I'm writing. I know some people find it loosens them up. I might have one when I'm proofreading a manuscript. I call it my victory bourbon um, when I finish one. But no, it's coffee and ice water all day long.
And when you're writing, do you prefer silence or do you listen to music? And if so, what kind of music?
It depends. When I'm in the initial stages and in that muddled middle of a book where I'm really having to focus, I need it quiet, or put on headphones with some kind of like white noise kind of thing, something to kind of isolate my mind a little bit. When I'm near the end and back into that rush where it's all coming together, that's where I find the theme music for the book, and that's one of my favorite parts. Every book is different. Every book I'll find some music that speaks to it. Like I really like movie soundtracks. I mean, they're designed right to evoke certain emotions and and hit certain beats. And so a lot of that when it's finally all coming together, and I'm really getting excited about it. Not just because it's almost done, but then it comes together and I realize, yeah, you did it, man. You got a pretty good story here. so, um, so so a lot of Hans Zimmer soundtracks, um, some Michael Giacchino. For some reason, when I was first getting started, the 2009 Star Trek reboot, the soundtrack from that really hit beats in my writing, and I had that one on loop a lot. So yeah, it depends on the book. I can't wait to see where the next one leads me. So
Okay. Writers often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions to help them with their work. And do you have any? And do they help or hinder you?
I have two dachshunds named Frankie and Beanie. So they're Franks and Beans, the wiener dogs. Uh, a long hair and a short hair. The long hair is Beanie, and he's our first one. We got him when he was tiny, and he's very attached to my wife and I. And um, he's usually in my lap or by my side when I'm writing. He's down here sleeping under my desk right now. And yeah, he's an old dog. He's about 13 years old now, and
Mhm.
he's not as lively as he used to be. But it's funny. Almost anytime I'm sitting at my desk, he wants up in my lap. If I'm in my, I don't know if you can see it. I got an easy chair back here that I do most of my actual writing in. He's always by my side when I'm doing that. So one of these days, I need to give him co-author credit.
That's cute. Um, so I only have two more questions for you. One is, where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? And I have to give Annie's a plug in every one of these videos. You can get Patrick's work at Annie's if you call us at 508-796-5613, or you can email us at orders at anniesbooksworcester.com. And where else can people find your book?
Well, the Bain.com website, you can find them there. And you can also, of course, find them on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and let's see, Books a Million. Target has them on their website. I don't know they're going to be on shelves, but they're definitely on the website. So really, anywhere you can find books, and encourage people to if you want to see them at your local bookstore, whether it's an independent or a chain, please go ask, because it's always a challenge to get newer and especially mid-list writers on shelves. I'm sure you know that. And then um, I've got I've got Amazon links on my site, which is chilesfiles.com.
Okay. And how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
Well, again, chilesfiles.com is my site. I'm on Facebook as Patrick Chiles and on Twitter as Patrick Chiles.
Okay.
So I didn't get very imaginative with that.
No, not escapeorbit.com or anything.
No, no, it's just me. I make it easy for people.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. This was a wonderful interview. And if you do get to the Boston area, we'd love to have you at our store. Um,
I will make it a point. I have to occasionally travel for my consulting job, and if it takes me to Boston, I will absolutely come by there.
Definitely let us know. All right.
I will.
Patrick Giles, thank you very much. And we will be
Thank
seeing
you.
you.
Thank you. I enjoyed
Okay.
it.
Bye.